Papadesian.
Here.
Buell.
Here.
Kaban.
Here.
Camilleri.
Here.
Sharon. Curry. Tabella.
Here.
Fitzgerald. Callaghan. Cardo.
Here.
Hall.
Here.
Healy.
Here.
Hoffman. Here. Holloway.
Here.
Iono. Johnson. Kowalski.
Here.
LeBeau.
Here.
Lester.
Here.
Magnan. Murata. Osgood. Payne.
Here.
Patel.
Here.
Salemi.
Here.
Salmonides. Carrier. Sweezy.
Here.
Taylor.
Here.
Torres.
Here.
Decino.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, please stand for the
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we get into the agenda, I'd like to take a moment of silence in the passing of Marty Corneen, who is a member of our Board of Finance, served as a member of the District Board for several years, and spent the better part of 30 years, or 25, 30 years, just let's say 25 years. He was accepted into the 25-year club last year. And he passed away several days ago, and I'd just like everybody please to take a few seconds to remember Marty and his passing and what he's done in his participation at the Metropolitan District Commission. Thank you. Public comments relative to agenda items. Item 5, approval of the minutes of the meeting of June the 4th, 2018. Is there a motion?
So moved.
So moved and seconded. Are there any additions or deletions? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? You got 1, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Do you have a change in the agenda? You making a motion? Well, we're going to have to take it out of order.
Chairman,
Yes.
I need to abstain on that also.
Larry. Here. Why don't you move to?
Okay. In my, Mr. Chairman, Art Halloran District Council, in my report from District Council, I would like to include 10B and number 12. I do not need an executive session for either one of those.
So you're asking that 10B and 12 in its totality be incorporated into your report
From District Council.
from
yes.
District Council, which is item 8. Is there a motion? Moved and seconded. Is there discussion? This matches up with what we're going to do tonight. I think it expedites the agenda. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. 6, I will make a response to item 8 when the District Council makes his report. I've been involved in the same issue relative to the question of DEEP and the discharge, the leaching from the existing landfill. So item 7, report from the Chief Executive Officer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be brief because I know we have a lot to talk about, and we are running half hour late. I would like to make the board aware we have met a couple of times with the town of East Hampton town manager and their staff, along with the DPH, to discuss the possibility of whether or not DPH would be willing to fund a grant for the building of a 7-mile water main from East Hampton to Portland. DPH has been very supportive of East Hampton over the number of years, and they are looking to finance a project to support East Hampton. So we'll keep you updated as we progress with that discussion. As I mentioned at the Water Bureau last month, with staff, we are evaluating whether or not to continue moving forward with the 1965 contract between MDC and the U.S. Army Corps for the Colebrook Reservoir. That system built in the 60s had the last payment, which will be part of the budget cycle this year, is approximately a $204,000 debt service payment, which will be the last one this 2019. In addition to that, there's also, as a requirement of the contract, to pay our share, a third of the maintenance cost. That maintenance cost has been continuing to rise since 2014. This past year, it was $685,000, so roughly $1 million for the cost of maintaining that agreement. The life of the dam is aging. The life of the hydro is aging. We only make about $1 million a year in hydro combined between Colebrook and Goodwin. So we're analyzing life cycle and whether or not we should continue to move forward, or we have the ability legally to get out of that agreement. I'm not going to talk about groundwater discharge because it's on our agenda and Bart's items. Just an update on the sewer user Avalorum working group. We did meet with all the town managers. I believe there were 2 towns not present. In Hartford? Oh, that's right, Hartford. Anyways, we had a discussion with them on the June 28th, and we are looking to finalize that report. There was a number of questions that we had. We've asked them to go back and recalculate their affordability as it relates to the member towns. The synopsis of the report basically implies that the going away from Avalorum to a sewer user charge, West Hartford would benefit. All of the towns would benefit to some level, but Hartford would be significantly impacted. So we have asked them they have to include, as part of affordability, they have to include the special sewer service charge, which is also a cost for the Clean Water Project to our customers. Once they do that, we believe that might change a little bit, but the synopsis is pretty much close to what I just mentioned. So we'll get back to you with that report. As part of the East Point Great Ponds development, as we've been talking about for a number of years now, probably 8 years in Windsor, we have had discussions with the developer. I have had discussions directly with the town manager, and they do believe that this development is going to move forward. They believe that they're going to be building about 200 residential units, and they're going to be starting this summer. So we're waiting to hopefully see that project move forward. I did mention in the Board of Finance meeting, as working with Cone Resnick, who is working with the finance and John's staff to help develop procedures and policies, acting as our Director of Finance in the interim of our vacancy. They have recommended to move forward with filling the Comptroller's Office position. So we have posted that. That did close July 5th, and John and his staff will be doing interviews to hire someone at that capacity in the next month. And then just going to skim through here, Mr. Chairman. I believe that's it for tonight.
Thank you. Are there any questions? No questions. Okay. Report from the District Council.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple items first, and then we'll get into the DEEP situation. As you know, the last time I reported that we had completed the final report from the Water Utility Coordinating Committee. And that was a 2-year process with 24 meetings in which we evaluated the exclusive service areas, processes involved in the exclusive service areas, the number of water companies, the types of water companies, evaluated the effect of stream flow regulations on the amount of water available through water companies, and that report has now been submitted to the Department of Public Health. At that, our last meeting there, the person who was the coordinator, Janine Gruen, who did an outstanding job from Malone and McBrome, presented certificates to those who had actually made it through. And in the central region, we had tremendous participation. We did it at the MDC, at the training center, made that available, and we had at least 12 people and as high as 20 people participating in every meeting over a 2-year period. So there was a lot of input from a lot of people, but there was only one citizen member who stuck it through all 24 meetings. And she was presented with a certificate at that, our own Julie Allen here, who received a certificate that says, in recognition of her outstanding contributions to the Central Region as the lone member of the general public to stick with the process for the full 24 months. And we should recognize that, as it is hard for members of the public to participate in these complex, time-consuming topics. And on behalf of the WIP, they asked me to present this certificate to Judy. So thank you, Judy. Second thing I will tell you, I participated briefly in the ad valorem study concerning the sewer user charge and the possibility of different methods of funding ad valorem. And what I advised all of the participating towns was that under our charter, we are able to use an ad valorem system that is based on tax collections by each of the member towns. If you're going to change that from tax collections to water usage and try to use an ad valorem system, you would have to get a legislative change. We should have learned a lesson from the Glastonbury case, in which we have to be, the interpretation of the Supreme Court was that our powers are limited. And I certainly would not want to take a chance that the entire ad valorem system be struck down because we're using the wrong system to collect it. So we need to be very specific, and if there is to be a change in the ad valorem system, it requires legislative approval.
Oh, Bart, just one other thing. In the event that that was the case and we moved from the ad valorem system, because there's an exception in the federal law allowing us to do that, we would not be able to go back to the ad valorem system.
Yes, and I also, Bill, opined that if you want to abandon ad valorem and simply go to a sewer user charge, that also would require legislative approval, because it is not clear from the ability to write for us to charge a sewer user charge that that was ever intended to fund the entire system. And again, you would be taking an enormous risk if somebody challenged that. And it could really cause financial chaos. So that was explained to the member towns. I do not believe that this board, and my advice to this board would certainly be, do not attempt to change that without legislative approval. Secondly, there was a decision by the Supreme Court concerning municipal unions that does apply to our unions. And I asked our HR director, Mr. Zeich, to notify our unions of this. He did so, and under the Supreme Court decision, we have to receive affirmation in writing from each member of the union that they wish to have their union dues deducted from their paycheck. It actually requires affirmative obligation on that. So he has written to them and given them a deadline of July 17th of 2018 by which to comply, or we simply won't deduct it. We can't, okay, under that Supreme Court ruling. Next, on the Patnod case, which is the class action on that that was brought, we have filed our motion to strike on the basis of immunity, statute of limitations. There has been the court has granted our motion to stay discovery pending resolution of the jurisdictional issues in that case. We are awaiting, they have a couple of weeks to file their reply brief, and then that will be the first thing that is considered in that case. That is necessary to do in order to preserve your appellate rights under any situation. As you remember, I've advised the board there is a real question on statute of limitations. It's a 3-year statute of limitations at best, in my opinion, and they are seeking to go back 12 years. I don't see how you can do that. But we'll find out. Do you have something, Mr. Chairman?
I just wonder when you get into the final issue.
Okay, I'm just about to start that now, which is, do you want to start it off?
Yeah, let me start it off. This is the issue of the leaching into our sewer relative to DEEP and some of the discussions that have evolved out of the fact that the state is now almost 2 years in arrears on paying the district. Bart will go through the legal aspects and some of the other ramifications. In front of you, because we finally got a meeting, or we had communications with the Commissioner of DEEP and the Attorney General's office. We had a Friday morning conversation at 8:30 with the Commissioner relative to this whole question, and that the board was going to deal with it this evening. We had extended an invitation to the Commissioner and or staff to come before the board. What they did is they requested that they write a letter under the signature of the Commissioner, which is in front of you. It's from Energy and Environmental Protection. It's dated July the 9th, 2018. It would make sense for you to spend a moment to read this. It's only 2 pages, and we will respond to some of the accusations and also response from DEEP. But more importantly is to give you a total update of where we stand right now. And Bart's going to proceed in that process. I wanted to, in the meeting Friday morning in the telephone conversation, because we had met, I believe it was April 5th, and we really hadn't had any progress since the April 5th meeting. And I just wanted an update on a few of the issues. Primarily was, are they still pursuing another alternative than MDC for the disposal of 80,000 gallons a day, roughly, I think it's 1 million gallons a year, or
Yes.
1 million gallons a year of what they call groundwater.
12 million. 12 million gallons a year.
A month, I'm sorry, 12 million a year. As a result, they said they were still pursuing it, but would not relate to us what those alternatives are, other than the fact that transporting it through tanker truck was not an alternative that they felt they could afford, basically, or worked out for them. But mostly it was affordability, because there are other people who do transport this groundwater to us for treatment, or they can go to Springfield, or they can go to Metabassett down in Middletown. So in that context, we did not want to leave the meeting with an abruptness or anything else, explaining to them that we're still seeking a resolution. And then we got into some back and forth on whether, what that'll be. That'll evolve in Bart's presentation, and then we can add on to that conversation. And also the meeting we had on April the 5th or 6th, which we got into this with the commissioner. And also an unfortunate incident that evolved relative to the initially DEEP allowed us to go out onto the site to camera the sewer and also to take samples and to our staff to do that, submit it to a qualified laboratory, and we'd also look at it ourselves because we have the capability of doing that. And that sort of got into a difficult situation when we were interrupted after taking the samples, and the Attorney General's office told us that we could take the samples, but we could not remove them from the property, which for all intents and purposes, you couldn't use them. So Bart will get into some of those problems, and I think have straightened that out through negotiation and protocol and a few other things. So Bart, go ahead, start it off.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Everybody who drives on 91 knows what the Hartford Landfill is. It's that mountain you see in the north of Hartford, which was City of Hartford Landfill, then CRRA had it, and it was transferred to DEEP by legislation, along with some assets that had been a reserve for closing that landfill. And the commissioner is correct in his letter about that. That happened in 2015. And there's really not much question about the basic facts, which are that, as he admits in his letter, they are taking between 10 to 30,000 gallons of ash leachate a day and putting it into the sewer, discharge from that, and about 1 million gallons a month of a groundwater discharge, and putting that into the sewer. We have an ordinance that was passed in 2007 that says that remediated groundwater put into our sewer is going to be charged at a different rate than anything else, because essentially we don't want groundwater in our sewer. Groundwater is taking water out of the ground and pumping it into the sewer, as opposed to the sanitary sewer or a rainwater discharge into the sewer. And the reason that we don't want it in our sewer is that the combined sewers in Hartford have a very limited capacity. And unfortunately, the route that they are choosing to take to discharge their 12 million gallons is into one of the most problematic of our combined sewers, ones that we're under a consent decree to improve to a 1-year storm level. And as we go through it, you'll see we're far away from that. And we are certainly not improving our situation by taking 1 million gallons of groundwater a month and putting it into a system that already lacks capacity. We gave them notice as part of our process of coming up with long-term control plans. We started examining every discharge into the sewer by anyone. And as part of that process, we discovered the quantity that is being put into the sewer and realized that the charge should be applied to this discharge. DEEP is, in their letter, somewhat suggested that this is simply groundwater. Well, if it is simply groundwater, what I would suggest to them, they simply dump it into the Connecticut River and keep it out of our sewers. There is a reason why they are not dumping it into the Connecticut River, is because that groundwater is contaminated groundwater. Now, surprisingly, DEEP is suggesting that they should not have to pay for putting this unremediated groundwater into our sewer, that our ordinance should only apply to remediated groundwater. If you think about that, that's exactly backwards, okay? You would want unremediated groundwater much less than you would want remediated groundwater. And for the Department of Environmental Protection to suggest that they should not have to pay because in fact they're dumping unremediated groundwater into the sewer just defies expectation. I just don't have an answer for that, which was why we asked Commissioner Klee to come here to explain his position. Now, when I tell you that there's a problem with the route that is taken, I have asked our engineers to draw for me on our maps where it is coming from and where it is going to. Now, you'll see, if you look up on the board here, that there is at the top level here, it'll show you where the dump is. And let me do it this way.
Why don't you do it with the-
This is the same map. Let me just do it this
Same
way.
map
Here's the
up there.
dump, okay, same map. Okay, and here's where it starts. Okay, and it goes, and along this route, okay, it goes all the way down to our disposal plant here. But along the route, we have regulators, which are permitted areas where the overflows are discharged. And remember, we have to get to a 1-year level of control. And unfortunately, with all of these, they are far less than a year. You'll see, and I'm going to have to stand for a second here. Right up here is what is called NM4, which is at Main and Fish Fry. And that is a discharge point. And the current level of control is less than 1 month. There are 9 events a year of discharges from NM4. And the receiving water is the North Meadows storage pond. Which is that, right, Scott?
Yes. Which then
Okay.
goes into the river.
NM5, which is down at Windsor and Sanford, is again, the level of control, which is supposed to get up to a year, is only 1 month, okay? So basically any storm, 12 times a year, you would expect 1 month storm, but it discharges 40 times a year, and from there it goes into the Connecticut River. The NM10, which is down at Market and Trumbull,
Also goes into the river.
is again less than a month level of control currently, and that discharges 49 times a year and goes into the Connecticut River. P1, which is at Commerce and Sheldon, is less than a month, and again, it discharges 49 times into the Park River conduit, but then into the Connecticut River. And the last one, Massac and Von Block, is at 1 month, okay, that's down here, less than 1 month capacity, and discharges 47 times a year, again, into the Connecticut River. So what is occurring with the current disposal system that DEEP is saying in its letter to you is, let me get it exactly. They maintain that the current method of discharge from the Hartford Landfill to the wastewater treatment facility is environmentally appropriate. Well, if, I suppose, the sewers never overflowed, that might be an argument. but it is the Department of Environmental Protection that designed the consent decree with us that mandated that we change this very sewer so that it stopped discharging as frequently as it does, something they obviously know, and it creates a problem for us, both environmentally and legally. And the problem is that the MDC is responsible for discharges from its sewer system into the Connecticut River. And we now have a part of these discharges, which is 1 million gallons a month, which we know contains excessive levels of ammonia. And the fact that DEEP has granted themselves abstinent a permit which says that they can have unlimited amounts of ammonia doesn't help us necessarily. And so we are exposed because we are overflowing some 49 times from all these various locations into the Connecticut River with higher levels of ammonia than is permissible under the EPA guidelines. And it is anything but environmentally appropriate. Now, we have asked DEEP, what alternative can you come up with? Because you can't both tell us that we have to change and stop having overflows at these CSO sites and at the same time put 1 million gallons a month of contaminated water into the sewer that you're telling us can't overflow. It creates an impossible situation. And to date, they've refused to tell us what, if any, alternatives they are considering other than to say that trucking it is not appropriate. To be clear, the charge that we asked from DEEP is very similar to the charge that we asked from Triumph. You will remember, those of you who were here on the board at the time, when we discovered that they were making a discharge into our system. We have some 20 other entities that are paying the charge for putting groundwater into our system. To be clear, we don't want groundwater in the system. It absorbs capacity. In particular, we don't want some kind of contaminated groundwater in the system, which is then discharged when you have an old system that overflows. They have taken the position that that this is a new charge. That is not correct. It was a charge that was passed in 2007. We are not seeking any charge for any amount retrospectively. It was only after we notified them of this discharge that we wish to be compensated, and that we wish to develop a plan to stop this discharge, so that we can completely treat this in an environmentally sensitive manner. We have unfortunately gotten nowhere. What we've gotten is a motion to dismiss a monetary claim, a refusal by the commissioner to disclose what alternatives there are or to work with us on creating some form of viable alternative, and simply an insistence that we accept their problem, which is that they have a problem at that landfill of contaminated groundwater that they obviously can't just pour into the Connecticut River, so they want to pour it into our sewer and make it our problem. That's all that I have, Mr. Chairman.
Are there questions? Why don't we start over here? We'll start on the left and go around.
Thank you.
Did we know about the contamination in 2007, and were we charging CRRA, or was it the city of Hartford before that? So what prompted us to pass the ordinance in
question.
2007? And
Looking back in history, Deep issued a permit to CRA in 1994. What it shows, and we have sketchy records, but what it shows is it looks like they issued a general permit, which is a lower level criteria associated with the contaminants that they had. In 1997, the same groups, Deep issued a permit, an individual permit, to, again, CRA. Bart has mentioned that the state had taken over the property 2014. We were aware in the 90s that this contaminant was coming in to whatever levels it was at that time. And after we received the fines, as Bart referred to, in 2004, 5, and 6, which was about $800,000 associated with non-compliance with the Clean Water Project or Clean Water Act, 74 Clean Water Act, we were fined $400,000 from the state of Connecticut, $400,000 from EPA. And so in 2007, there was a fee that was developed specifically to discourage groundwater, specifically contaminated water, that's generated from permitting processes where the permit is issued by Deep. In this case, Deep is not only a permittee, but the permitter. And that was initiated in 2007. I cannot explain to you why we didn't begin charging Deep in 2007, but what I can tell you is in 2015, as John and Rob Constable were looking at, as we know, there was a major concern about Avalorum. There was a major concern about the nonprofits within the 8-member towns, who was paying special sewer service charge, who wasn't paying special sewer service charge. We went through in finance and we analyzed every nonprofit within the district within each town. And John and his staff went through an exhaustive effort to work with each town finance director to get exactly who was in the town, what town buildings were defined as a municipal performing local government. And so we went through that exercise, and as part of that exercise and looking at all the state buildings as well, we realized that our sewer ordinances, our sewer usage charge for nonprofits is associated with waste developed by our drinking water. So if you're a customer, a church, and you utilize 2 CCF per month, you generate waste, and we charge you whatever your consumption is times the sewer usage charge per CCF, which is about $3 and change, and that's what we charge you in lieu of Avalorum. So this charge is associated with waste that's generated from consuming our product, drinking water. This product that we're receiving, and Bart mentioned, we have a number of other facilities that are in the same predicament. They're taking groundwater for a specific purpose, and Bart quoted and referenced the commissioner's letter, and in his third paragraph of his first page, he says at the bottom, the purpose of the groundwater flow control system is to stop leachate from the municipal waste portion of the landfill from leaving the site and impacting the surrounding environment. So we can call it leachate, we can call it groundwater. The point is there's an environmental condition on that site that, to Bart's point, cannot leach into the ground. They do not want it to leach into the ground. It is not stormwater generated from the streets of Hartford. In Hartford, we're a combined sewer system. So the system was built and designed to collect stormwater from the streets, stormwater from the parking lots, stormwater from the homes. But it was never built and intended to collect groundwater. And yet we receive an $800,000 fine for us to get groundwater and stormwater that doesn't belong out of the system. So we generated the fee in 2007. For whatever reason, it wasn't applied to the landfill. It should have been, But as Bart's point, we're not going back. We're simply saying we found this issue. There's approximately 85,000 gallons per day that we're aware of that is coming from this property. And they're only using 1 CCF per month, which is 750 gallons of water. So obviously, the waste that's generated on the site is not coming from consuming 85,000 gallons a day of drinking water. So therefore, as Bart said, it goes back to our fee structure for groundwater. We have a list of construction projects. We have towns who have been impacted by this very fee. Construction projects with no environmental issues, simply needing to dewater the ground for construction purposes. Commissioner Salemi can speak to this. The state of Connecticut is paying the MDC 13 cents a gallon to dewater that area and dump that water into the sewer system. Our tunneling company down at the South Meadows that's building our tunnel is doing exactly the same thing, paying the same fee. Triumph, as Bart mentioned, has environmental issues, and they are under permit from DEEP to discharge water from the ground so that it doesn't further contaminate the groundwater any further, and therefore they pay the 13 cents. We're only asking the state to pay exactly what they require others that they permit from us to do the same.
Does that answer?
So, just on that, it doesn't matter if there's any chemicals in the water or not. It's groundwater, period,
No,
that
it
we're
does.
charging the fee for.
That's correct. Bart's point, though, this is Bart's point.
I understand there is,
Right.
but
The point Bart's making is that here we are under consent order. Here we are not getting paid for this groundwater, and yet the material that's being delivered to our system without our approval, without our authorization, unlike every other permit that's issued by DEEP, they're telling us basically they don't have to pay, and it's not their problem. They can't afford it. What Bart's point is that what's in that discharge, we own it. If the pipe breaks on the way to the plant, as Bart mentioned, then we have to clean it up. Our 8-member towns have to pay to remove the contaminated soil as we're fixing that sewer pipe. If we have an overflow, which we're mandated to bring this level, Bart mentioned it's a 1-month control. We're going to spend $2.5 billion to get to a 1-year level of control. We're spending all this money, yet they're discharging something and don't want to pay for it. And our position is there's others that are paying this very same fee. If you're not interested in paying the fee, then we have to address it.
Mr. Chairman?
Don.
Mr. Chairman, I believe that DEEP has other options for this situation. If I'm not wrong on this, if I am, please correct me. I know that the town of Newington had an unfortunate major oil spill a short time ago, and they had a lot of water which needed to be treated. When they contacted the MDC, options were explained to them. To the town, and the town had an option of pumping it into the MDC sewer line and paying the MDC 13 cents a gallon to treat the water, or use a private company to haul away and treat the water. The town of Newington chose to use the private company. They must have had a savings for them not to use the MDC. So it's important for the MDC to treat everyone the same. Therefore, if DEEP feels the MDC is too expensive, then they have the option to use another company for the groundwater coming from the Hartford Landfill. It's not fair for the MDC's member towns and all of its citizens to continue to take groundwater from the landfill without getting paid the same as anyone else using the services of the MDC. This has become a major expense to the ad valorem, to the 8-member towns, and the tax-paying citizens, which can't continue. As a commissioner representing the town of Newington, I know that this situation needs to be corrected as soon as possible because we are putting a major burden on all 8-member towns, making up this expense from DEEP. And there are other options. They could treat this right at the site and then dump it into the Connecticut River if they choose. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Just to quickly address that issue, that was one of the issues that we discussed, as I said, in the last Friday afternoon morning conversation with DEEP. And it was made clear, and I asked this question in April, in the April meeting, is that there's an alternative to truck the product to either Hartford, MDC, to Springfield, or to Middletown to have it processed. And I was told by the landfill person that works for DEEP and manages the landfill site that was an economic problem for them, that they need, I believe it's 10 to 12, 19 trucks a day to take the 80,000 gallons off the site, and that it was financially a difficulty, and it was also physically a difficulty for them to get that onto that site. They did not articulate or specify what exactly that problem was, other than the fact that they couldn't afford to pay it. And it was brought to their attention that they are responsible for that. And as a state, they have an obligation to do that. And they said that that wasn't an alternative. So there are alternatives, however. Buddy?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to add to this that it's not a question of if or when this is going to lead to an overflow in this system would happen. As you heard Bart say earlier, we have nearly 50 overflows a year right now that where the effluent from this landfill is part of those overflows. And so in the 80,000 gallons a day that they're adding to the system, it's not just a tax on the plant that has to treat this contaminated water when it gets there, but it's also the cost of cleaning up a spill. If one of these spills should get really serious, they would have to clean it up. And the towns, because this is coming in on the sewer side of the MDC, the towns, the ad valorem tax is going to have to pay for it. So that's why the towns, I think, have a tremendous interest in, the outcome of this, what we're currently going through. And I do want to say that I know Scott was pointing this out. So we accept the groundwater, which is, it doesn't have to necessarily be treated, it has to have dirt taken out of it. So sometimes on construction sites, they'll have what's called a frac tank, and you squeeze the dirt out of it and just get water. It's clean water, but it still takes up the capacity at the plant, and it takes up the capacity in the system, that in our collection system, where without that water in it, it may not overflow. Now with that water in it, we get a rainstorm, and the whole thing overflows, and that water is on the streets of Hartford. And that's essentially what happens here, is this pollution is going to wind up in, Bart, you didn't say it at the beginning, but the very first one winds up in a pond right near the landfill. All the other overflows go direct to the Connecticut River. They're going right into the river. So the very system that DEP has set up to prevent that from happening is what they're saying, well, there's nothing we can do about it. Well, there certainly is something you can do about it. But and you've asked us to spend $2.5 billion to do something about it. But in the meantime, we're still living with this problem, which is causing pollution to the Connecticut River. There's no doubt about it. So,
Well, to add on to that, even given the fact that we do acknowledge along the way, that doesn't cover surcharging. Surcharging can happen into anyone's house if we have an excessive rainstorm. The surcharging will, if they don't have a backflow valve, it can come directly into a house, into an office, into a business facility, or anything else, or onto the streets. So that, it's a permeable system. It's not a system that's sealed. It has a history. We're under a federal mandate and state mandate to resolve that issue. So when they say that that's not just one of the issues, surcharging is a major issue, to add on to what Buddy said. Avery?
I just have a short question for Attorney Halloran. I think what you had mentioned before was that either the contaminant or one of the primary contaminants is ammonia, and that DEEP has somehow provided themselves an exception from getting it from them to us, and did not pass along the exception, which I'm not suggesting it should have been, but is that correct?
That's correct. They have, by the use of a special permit, permitted excessive levels of ammonia to the permittee. Okay, we are not necessarily the permittee, however.
Thank you.
Rich,
Commissioner Key, is it Klee? Commissioner Klee states that he also has 4 other former landfills. Do you know how those landfills are treated?
We've asked that question.
We don't know.
don't know.
Be interesting to find out if they transport or direct discharge into some sewer system. I'd like to see if you
We
can
asked
find
that question in April.
out. No answer.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure. Go ahead, Amy.
Following Richard, I was asking myself a minute ago, Mr. Klee, is he the commissioner or one of the commissioners?
The Commissioner of the Department of Environmental and Energy and Environmental Protection.
Okay, so since we've had a number of points or questions where there doesn't seem to be an answer, and there hasn't been an answer forthcoming on a number of issues, so who does Mr. Klee report to, and why aren't we getting the information we require?
The governor, Mr. Wonderful Governor.
Well, he reports to the governor, and he is, I can't explain why we're not getting the information that we have been suggesting. Particularly, I don't think it's one thing to get the money, but remember, this is a long-term game here for the MDC, where you're under a federal and state mandate to get those sewers up to the 1-year level. And just showing, the P1, as far as the quantity of discharge, is the worst offender in the entire system. If you were to pick the wrong spot to put this, you couldn't do a better job. Because even if you had found some way to route it into the tunnel that we're building, we'd be far better off. But here we are particularly vulnerable to discharges in that particular system, probably because it's amongst the oldest, I would think, Scott.
Correct.
Do we have any way of estimating the amount of contamination already dropped into the river from the overflows that have occurred, let's say, over the past year?
We could calculate that, but to Bart's point is that based on the system as it is today, that with that extra 85,000 gallons, which they're not paying us for, that is helping and contributing to taking up capacity. Commissioner Salemi mentioned this, and therefore it goes into something other than the pipe. It's going into homes, it's going into the streets, or it's getting to the river. So we have, as the chairman mentioned, we were out we had an agreement through BART and through the AG's office to go out to the site last 2 Wednesdays ago, which is June 27th. And one of the reasons was that we were going to take samples. We want to verify, where the connections were, and really document the existing on-site condition as to what's actually happening on the site. Now, as the chairman and Bart mentioned, after we took our samples, we took 8 samples at 2 different locations. We were told by the AG's office we were not allowed to take those off the site. Now, I have here a copy of what we call the DMR report, which is a discharge monitoring report. This is a DEP document. DEP requires everyone that they give a general and individual permit to report their discharges to DEEP. It's done in this report. This report happens to include the landfill because the landfill is the owner and permittee at the same time. So this information is published monthly. It's a public document. It's given to all of us as wastewater organizations, and we're not responsible to make sure that someone is complying with DEEP's permit, but we get the information. All as we were simply trying to do is to verify that what the information is on the report is accurate. And that's why we asked to have the testing done.
Or what else is in it?
Or what else is on there? We don't know, because we weren't allowed in on the property. And the ironic part of this is there's two locations we took a test at. One of the locations, which is right inside the footprint of the landfill, the structure, the manhole that's there is ours. It's MDC's. So we were actually not allowed to take samples from our own infrastructure, which the information is documented in DEEP's report monthly. So we can't quite understand why there was a misunderstanding about what we were going to do when we were there. We thought we were very clear that we were going to do a number of things, including taking samples. But anyways, we did, as Bart mentioned, we're out there today. We did agree. We did take samples today at 2 o'clock. Chris, it'll be Wednesday or so before we get results? Wednesday. So we did get past that issue, as the chairman mentioned, with our conversation on Friday. But we're really not anywhere in terms of Bart's concerns or my concerns about.
Does the discharge included in that report include the overflows into the river?
No, this is simply the sampling of the discharge to the sewer.
Right.
There's
We haven't
36 or
followed the
so.
rest of it.
Yeah, everybody who gets a permit from DEEP is responsible to take samples and send those samples into DEEP, and then they generate this report.
I understand, but my question was any way of measuring the degree of contamination into the Connecticut River from the overflows that are caused,
So,
not from the measured discharge.
so we have 84. Bart mentioned regulators. We have 84. There's a 84, 86. We don't really know, but it's 84. And so, as you can imagine, when it rains, we're treating about 45 million gallons a day on a dry day, like a day like today. And when it rains, we're treating anywhere from 120 to up to 200, right? That's what the plant's size for it today. So the only way to really understand what they're discharging is to be out there during that storm and taking samples right then and there during that storm. Because if you take the sample at the 84 regulators, you've got 120 million gallons of water coming in at these different locations. So it's very difficult. That's why it was so important for us to get the samples at the facility. And we would want, to your point, Commissioner, we'd want to take the samples during a storm at the facility. But to Bart's point, we know the system's not large enough. So we know that 85,000 gallons of that contaminant is getting into the streets of Hartford, the homes of Hartford, the businesses of Hartford, and then eventually leading to the river, Connecticut River.
Rich, I want to be clear. The minute that effluent gets into our system, it's ours.
It's ours.
Mhm.
They have no liability. It's our liability.
Normally speaking, the permittee, if it's not permitted, would have liability, but we also would have liability. In this case, because DEEP has given themselves a permit which allows this, they would not, they have the authority to do that. I mean, that could be challenged. But, even if we're not challenged by DEEP on this, we certainly can be challenged by a clean water advocacy group. That's happened in Springfield, for instance. They've sued Springfield over their discharges. It is not unreasonable to expect that eventually we're going to get sued over this.
Well, it's no different than putting in a truck to carry it down Route 91 with a couple of holes in it, so it leaks all the way down to the plant. It just, be more obvious.
Or it'd be the trucker would have a problem then.
We're responsible for the health, safety, and welfare. We really have to look at this, as you said, Bart, it may not be the dollars and cents, but what you showed us tonight with the overflows and we have a system that is being reworked. And at this point, it should not probably be taxed with this type of an overflow. There's other issues outside of the dollars and cents, in my opinion. The health, safety, and welfare has to be a strong concern.
Right. I think when you start, one of the problems we have here is communications with DEEP now is limited because they claim that we are suing them in court to be able to sue them. We're before the claims commissioner. The state has to permit us to sue the state. So because we're in litigation, they claim they can't enter into an open negotiation or discussion with us without the presence of attorneys in the room. So obviously, that's what we've been doing on the call. We had lawyers on it, both sides. But what I think is even more significant is this is a public health issue. This is not a question of litigating the fact whether we can litigate through the claims commissioner in the state of Connecticut. It's a very serious question of impacting public health, which I would assume would come under the auspices of the Department of Health and not DEEP. Am I right or wrong? I don't know.
I think that the permittee and the permitter is deep, and they have control of the sewer system, so.
Well, they don't have control over the sewer system.
No, but in terms of permitting, so, that's the challenge. DPH, this is not their purview on the sewer side.
Well,
So if it was to contaminate a public water supply, then DPH would be involved.
Well, but one issue is that obviously there could be damage to the environment, which is a responsibility of DEEP. And
Right.
I don't think anybody is going to argue that point. However, public health seems to be as much and probably more importantly, because the environment can be damaged, but when you start damaging human life, you're talking about public health and safety. And I don't know whether the Department of Health isn't a major player in this issue also to protect that issue. It's in drinking water they are. Why would they not be in something that comes out of one of our sewers and causes physical harm to a population? Why would they not also? I don't know the answer to it, but the logic, I think, follows that public health has got to have some obligation in this process. So. I saw some other hands. Who? Commissioner Hoffman, and go ahead, Al.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify a couple of things. Scott alluded to a particular sewer at the landfill, some kind of a collection manhole, call it whatever it is. Is that a single site connected to the landfill?
So the landfill has, in terms of structure, it obviously has, there's two land areas. One is the area northeast up along the river, and that's the ash area. That area has a liner underneath it. So literally, they put a liner down on the original ground, and then they put the ash on top of it. They collect the water that collects within that area, and they pump it to a tank. And when that tank gets full, they discharge that through piping, which leads to these manholes. Specifically, that discharge goes to the manhole outside of the footprint of which we own, outside the footprint of the landfill. The larger area is we call Area B. That is the landfill itself, and that has a liner on top, but not underneath. So that area is the majority of the water that rains on top of the landfill just sheds off, and you see those gullies along the sides, along the highway. So that water, sheet flow they call it, that runs off of the ground and into the drainage ditch. But underneath is where they refer to that as contaminated groundwater, leachate, whatever they want to call it. But it's basically water that either gets through the membrane or is generated from the waste, and it it is leaching down into the ground. And because there's no membrane, as the river goes up and down, they're concerned about this contamination affecting the Connecticut River and the ground. So they collect that, and it gets drained by gravity to a manhole on the property, which is our infrastructure, and then it goes off of the property, and there's about 100 feet, and then there's another manhole where both of the waste streams combine. So that's and then there's 3 small buildings on the property which have water meters. 2 of them are City of Hartford's. One of them is this treatment building that Deep operates.
So we're able to collect into our manhole, and by extension, some pipeline. We're able to collect a certain amount, but we're not able to collect a certain other amount that could be leaching just by gravity into the Connecticut River.
Correct.
Yeah, well, yes, thank you. And I just think that that's a larger issue, because all that might be leaching into the Connecticut River clearly is not MDC's problem. And not only do we collect some of this groundwater or untreated sewage or whatever it is, not only do we collect it, but because of the system and the amount, we have these places along the road to the sewer processing plant that overflow. So, I mean, the whole thing, it just smacks of amazing inability by the state to control and regulate what is in citizens' best interest. And yet, they're going to be the first ones to say to the MDC, we're going to assist the federal government to make sure that you folks followed a consent order that says do this, this, and this. Meanwhile, the state has its own problem and no way to fix it. And then when we go to collect our fees, they turn a blind eye. It's just amazing to me. It's just amazing. I don't even know what to say as a question.
We agree.
Is there any damage to our infrastructure being done?
Yes, we have, back in April, I believe it was April, we went out there and we took video pictures of our sewer off the property. So that manhole, it's about 100 foot off of the gate of the landfill. We took pictures. It's been in my monthly report ever since. We provide that document to Deep. Betsy Wingfield gets a copy of that every month. Carrie Martin sends that over to her. And then we just recently, in our visit this past Wednesday, June the 27th, we took one of our goals to get on the property was to see if the tuberculation is occurring inside on the property at that manhole, so that we could verify that the tuberculation off the property is being generated from on the property. And we've confirmed that. We've got those pictures. And so that is will be in my monthly report. And that we don't know what that number is, but we do know that nothing's cheap to fix. It could be upwards of 100,000. I don't know.
So even if they were paying the 13 cents, it's probably not even worth taking this material, because it's going to contaminate, it's going to corrode our pipe systems because it's so contaminated. And our infrastructure is certainly going to cost a lot of money to replace. So we've got to do something different.
Before I call Ray, any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, what are we looking from the board today in terms of future actions or direction?
Well, I mean, I think we gotta get some direction from the board on how we deal with this. Do we deal with it? One of the problems we're having is that the process is rather cumbersome to deal with because we have to go through attorneys. They won't talk to us about a specific solution to it without going through the attorneys because they claim we're in litigation and that creates some legal problems. So that means we've got to have lawyers there to discuss this between our two staffs, which creates some problems. So we're going to have to get some direction. In the fifth paragraph on the second page, Commissioner, it is not helpful to relations. This is relative to MDC and DEEP. When MDC is communicating to its member towns that their bills are increasing because the department is not paying its landfill discharge bill. That is an unfair and inaccurate characterization of the situation. Now, I think we've been through a budget process. We meet constantly with our towns when we go through that budget process. And as a tax-exempt institution and a nonprofit, MDC is a municipality, which means we don't profit from the process between our towns and our customer base. So that in the event that this revenue that we claim is due us is not collected, it is a negative to the budget. So that money, because it does not come into the coffers of MDC, and because we have no profit margin that we can take it away from in the event not to affect our customer base, it goes directly back to the towns in an ad valorem, or it goes back to the user and a user charge if they're not a for-profit organization. And ultimately, it becomes fairly obvious that that negative revenue is costing the people and the taxpayers and those people that pay a user charge that are nonprofits, it's costing them more money because they have to supplement what we're failing to take in as revenue, even though we're still providing a service. So I just think that it is obviously a cost, a direct cost to MDC into their towns through the MDC by virtue of an ad valorem charge.
So basically, because of the publicity side, they woke up and they made that accusation that we are not accurate about what we did. But besides that, now what options do we have in terms of legality? And if you need any general directions from the board, we should have a resolution now. So you proceed along that line.
I would suggest to you that as the lawyers, we have done what we can to date, okay? We filed a claim with the Claims Commission. We tried to reason with the commissioner. We tried to reason with the people who work for the commissioner. We tried to reason with the Attorney General's office. And I have to report to you that we're no further along than we were when we first reported this issue to you. So it is, frankly, we're looking for direction from the board as to what we should communicate the board's position is to the commissioner.
So the answer is we've exhausted.
Outside of the Claims Commission.
I don't think that's a process, is it?
We would offer that to them if the board so directed. I didn't feel I had the power to do that myself, but I would certainly agree to, if they claim that they're going past, were willing to try this matter, and to just, you have no right to bring the matter right now. And so they would have to agree to something outside the Claims Commission, which to date the state hasn't done.
Right?
Yeah, we've lost 1.25 million in 2016. We lost 2.5, these are budgeted numbers. We lost 2.5 million in 17, and in the first 2 quarters of this year, another 1.25 million. Like Bill says, I mean, our budget's 5% of the 8% increase is because we're not collecting this money. So I think we should make it come to a head one way or the other, and I have a short resolution, which I'm happy for any amendments, because it's just, after hearing what staff said tonight, Rich, a number of commissioners, Buddy, I mean, they're paying it through one of his projects that he's working with the state. Be it resolved, the MDC Council is instructed to inform DEP that the continued discharge of groundwater and leachate into the sewer system will not be permitted after September 1st, 2018, unless A, a long-term abatement plan is developed between the parties, B, MDC is paid for the outstanding charges or discharge of groundwater and leachate from the landfill to date, and a commitment to pay future charges is made. So that gives them 6 to 7 weeks to negotiate with us a final, that was period.
I second the motion.
That will give them, I mean, we gotta make this come to a head.
Yes.
This is, I mean, Scott, if you go into this media clip thing we got tonight, in February, you might want to throw darts. There's a picture of Scott and myself. But, I mean, this whole thing was brought to water. It's come to this board a number of times at every budget. We know it, and it's not even the chemicals in the water. It's just this groundwater discharge they have to pay. The other state agencies are paying it. Private corporations are paying it. Pay it. Or, if you don't want to pay it, you do like the town of Newington did. You truck it, you ship it, however, to another facility. You can go to Springfield, you go to Matt, if you work a deal with them. But they charge the rates the same thing almost anyway. So, I think, Bart, it's time we come to a head and instruct you to go ahead and send them a letter.
Well, or I think you ought to include the board in the legal counsel in some type of a negotiation, because
Yes,
we're
no,
looking-
to negotiate until then, but something has to,
I mean, we don't want to make it a fixed date and say that's going to happen we don't want to create an environmental disaster either. I mean, we want to be reasonable in coming to that final.
something's coming up, but if they don't do anything by September 1st,
I understand, but
then we come back and make this.
but we want to be reasonable.
Yes,
Well, I'm saying,
but we've been reasonable
They
now
could
for
come-
8 quarters.
if they come back to us and say, well, this is what we're trying to accomplish, and this is how much time we're going to need to do it,
That's
and
fine.
da-da-da-da-da, that's part of a negotiation.
With a date.
For the day.
You know, permitting requirements that require 13 cents for everyone they permit, except them, and with the ammonia issue, and the ridiculous audacity of this 5th paragraph. I mean, a line has got to be drawn. If you don't set a date or some kind of a finite instruction, if you will, this will go on for another 5 years.
No, I'm not saying, I'm saying the board should pick out a specific date to give us to be able to negotiate something. If it doesn't, then it's going to happen. I understand
Will
that.
not be permitted to
Haven't got
by after
information.
September 1st of 2018.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
It's fine, he has a date.
But hopefully they're willing to come and sit with us and discuss what those alternatives are.
Right, they got 8 weeks or something.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
I'm sorry.
I guess, I guess one of the things I'm concerned about here is that we have a history of getting beat up in the court of public opinion. And I think, and I agree, I think that we need to draw a line in the sand. But I think that we need to think carefully about how we are going to present our case to the general public, and more particularly our member towns.
this can be an issue that can be made fairly obscure and complicated. And I just think that we need to gear up and make sure that we get our case out there and we state it clearly and concisely, and if we have to simplify it, so be it. But if we don't do that, I think we're going to be arguing against ourselves.
Lou?
Yeah, Bart, have we exhausted all legal possible avenues?
No, we could, if it comes to it in September, rather than, we do, under our ordinances, have the right to simply refuse service. We could, as an alternative to that, if the board so wished, seek an order of the court to prohibit DEEP from continuing to discharge. But that's something you can decide at a later date. There are actions that could be contemplated under the Clean Water Act against DEEP. But to answer your question, no. But as to we are at a bit of a stalemate on the issue of being before the Claims Commissioner and DEEP's willingness to make any payment for their discharges into our sewer system. I don't have any other solutions to that one.
Which would terminate the issue relative, it then would just be a cost to date or to whenever the service is suspended. I would assume they would also have the right to go after an injunctive relief if there was a major environmental problem, and that would be part of the court process, I would assume.
Just to Al's point, I don't see how any of the towns, our member towns, could be against this, because for the last 3 budgets, the town managers, the finance directors, whoever John is, I mean, they come here with the mayors and stuff and go through the budget with us. That line item as a revenue has been in the budget for those years. And as Bill said, if you don't receive a revenue, you run a deficit. So, I mean, the town managers, I would think, would be, and the finance directors would be 100% in favor of this to finally, hey, let's get the revenue or take it out of the budget, and you have to have a smaller budget, or, you don't run a deficit every year. This is the 3rd year we're running a deficit on this line item.
Gary?
I don't disagree with either of the points, and I generally agree with the proposal that you've just put on the floor. I'm not sure that September 1st is the right date. This is the summertime. The DEP, as we know, operates very slowly, even when they're trying to do something. It may be a little better to put it off another month or so. It's one suggestion. A second suggestion, and I agree with Al, because I think what you're saying is we want to make sure we involve they would be on our side. They should be. The town should be on our side. And that we involve the towns in that process. And the third thing I'd say is something that has not been said. I entirely agree with my colleague, Commissioner Hoffman, on the absurdity of this whole situation and the irony of Department of Environmental and Energy Protection, Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, creating an environmental disaster. It's incredible. And it seems to me there's an opportunity here, and this is where I was last meeting also, I think we should approach potential allies. And that is the environmental groups, the Nature Conservancy, the Sierra Club, the variety of environmental groups that are out there. They don't want to see leachate and a variety of chemicals dumped into the Connecticut River, either directly or through the sewers and then through overflow. I mean, it seems to me that, and if you're talking about trying to get the state to move, and trying to get the DEEP to move, Hartford Courant doing an article about this would not be a bad idea. And trying to bring in some environmental groups who would comment on this in terms of what they are doing to the environment.
See,
Commissioner Hartford Courant did do an article, and they are here tonight.
Buddy?
I think in response to what Al, Taylor was saying,
I mean, I would point out, the paragraph again that it says, it is not helpful to relations, however, when the MDC is communicating to its member towns that their bills are increasing because the department is not paying its landfill discharge bill. I think that's a not so indirect reference to the letter I sent to the member towns in January about why the budget has gone up. Ray was saying why the budget's gone up each year. And what they go on to say here is that it's unfair and inaccurate characterization of the situation, but they didn't say it wasn't true. And they know that it's true. But I think they'll say, well, you lost revenue, but what was your real cost, versus the revenue? So this argument could go on forever, to try to get to the answer to it. So I do think we have to put some kind of deadline on it at some point. Otherwise, it's just going to go on. It's going to go on forever. Inaccurate characterization to me is it's not true. Well, and the other thing I don't mean this to be news to anybody that was here when we had our relationship with CRRA, but no matter what happens, you're going to pay this. I'm going to pay this. If the district has to eat this, then we're going to pay it through the ad valorem tax in the member towns. If the district doesn't have to eat it, you're going to pay it through your taxes to the state of Connecticut. So we're still going to pay for this. DEP doesn't pay for anything. The taxpayers pay for this. This is a battle over who has primacy over which way these things go. And it's obvious, I think, from our comments from our council that since they're the ones that issue the permit, that somebody's got to point out that they're in a position where there might be some conflict of interest with respect to their own activities and with respect to which road they choose to go down if somebody else doesn't step in between, which is why I don't think arbitration. I'm not interested in an arbitrator splitting the baby in its
It would
half.
be somebody neutral that would make a decision. It could be binding, could be non-binding. I mean, it would be, I'm just saying, you're spinning your wheels at the claims court. You have another state agency making.
Well, they haven't given us an answer yet.
Well, wouldn't public health, the whole public health department be critical to public health?
you pay one way or the other.
If I could just add to Commissioner Salemi's point, Commissioner Salemi, you mentioned, so 8 member towns are paying for this lack of $2.8 million in revenue. How many towns utilized the landfill over the life of the landfill?
That's right.
Why is it 72? Or why is it that these 8 towns have to pay for the closure and the expense associated with the closure for a landfill that was used by the state of Connecticut for 30 years? Why is it this 8-member town that have to pay for that expense?
Well, the answer to that, Scott, for now is because they can, and that's the only reason why, because they can.
And I just want to point out that because of the ad valorem system, West Hartford is bearing, an unfair amount of this cost. So I don't think a lot of people realize that still, how much we suffer under that arrangement. And my other question is, do we just physically, do we have the ability to just stop the discharge?
Yes.
So we
No,
can-
not discharge, stop the access to the sewer. Yes, we do.
So that is something that we can threaten them with.
Yes, you can. And I would just like to say that that and arbitration are not exclusive of each other. In fact, just yesterday, Attorney Stone asked, and we did some additional research as to the ability of the state to agree to waive the step of the Claims Commission and get to the merits. We didn't specifically discuss arbitration, but that's certainly one way to do it. But I don't think the resolution to resolve this by September 1st and arbitration are mutually exclusive of each other. We can certainly propose both.
Could I hear the resolution one more time?
Sure.
I kind of lost track of what
You got it, John, or you want me to?
John.
Be resolved, MDC Council is instructed to inform DEEP that the continued discharge of groundwater and leachate into the sewer system will not be permitted after September 1st, 2018, unless A, a long-term abatement plan is developed between the parties, B, MDC is paid for the outstanding charges for discharge of groundwater and leachate from the landfill to date, and a commitment to pay future charges is made. Now, that goes back to the second quarter, the third quarter of 2016. So it's approximately, John would have to come up with the numbers, but it's approximately around $5 million.
Is that clear in the resolution, the look-back period?
Yes, we've
Yes.
done that in the Claims Commission
Yes.
also.
In the Claims
We have a
Commission.
limited claim.
It's from when we started billing them. We're not gonna go back to
We're not going back to
2007.
2007. We're
Right,
going back to the
when
date
we
when
started.
it was brought to our attention and we brought it to their attention. Lou?
Yeah, I just a hypothetical as we do this, and I think this time around you left out September 1, which I think should be in there, by the way, Sean, Gary.
Permitted after September 1, unless A and B.
Okay, I'm sorry. A hypothetical, if they were to send us a check today for the amount they owe us, what would we do with that money?
Give it back to the town.
But it would reduce the town rates.
That's the only thing we can use it for.
That's correct. That's all you can use it for, but.
And we
we've
said
already
in the
committed
budget
that to the town.
process that if we received it, it would be sent back. So West Hartford would get their larger share, and every town would get, the Little Rock Hill would get 5.6% because we pay about 5%.
This is salary, 0 times 2.
Every other town would get their percent.
Just want to be clear.
Avery?
I just want to add to the resolution, A, at the very end of that, stipulate by September 1st, 2018.
Okay, a long-term abatement plan is developed between the parties.
By September 1st, 2018.
Also, okay,
Otherwise,
so I
if
have
it's on
that date in
September,
there
it's a
twice.
otherwise it's a loophole.
Further discussion? Al?
Mr. Chairman, the language in there about a commitment from the state, is it unreasonable to think about that commitment must be acceptable to the MDC as opposed to just a statement in a letter?
That's fine to put that in there. I was just,
I think it's
just-
important.
it would have to be
It's
agreeable
explicit
by
in-
the
it's
two parties.
explicit. It would have to be approved by this board, whatever that settlement is.
Let's
It's
put it in
explicit.
there. I have no problem.
I think it's explicit for the purpose of the resolution, that that's the intent,
Right.
They're not gonna do it anyway.
part of the legislative discussion. I'm sorry, John.
So, based on this resolution, are we gonna have to come back to the board again and say, okay, we're shutting it off? Or are we saying, come September 1st, we're gonna shut off the water or shut, whatever we're gonna do, sewer or water? Or are they gonna come back to the board again and have to ask permission of what we're gonna do?
We would have to come back
resolution
to the
should be-
board again.
We have to come back to the board again, because it's actually a negotiation here that we're talking about. But what the board is saying, that's the date we're gonna use as a shut-off date. If there's no movement, then obviously,
Well,
we're gonna
I
have to
would
make a
feel,
decision.
Commissioner, that, Mr. Chairman, that we should come back either way.
Right.
We would have to get approval of the board of any resolution because it would include this abatement plan, which the board would have to agree to.
Or a closure plan, which the board would have to agree to.
And if they haven't done it, I would want the board to make a final
Right.
determination, rather than
We have
just
only
do
one meeting before September.
We can hold a special
Special
meeting if
meeting.
we
We
have.
can have a special meeting.
Special meeting.
September.
Is there further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, let's move on. Hopefully, we can resolve something.
Chairman,
Denise?
can I just circle back to the beginning of Mr. Halloran's report with a couple of questions? We
Sure,
kind
go
of
ahead.
moved right into this, and I didn't
Your-
have a
your
chance.
point.
So, in regard to the ad valorem update, you said all but two of the towns were there. Was West Hartford
Yes.
in
Yes,
present? Okay.
Yes, West Hartford was well represented.
Okay, just double checking. And since it does require legislative action, are we also having these discussions with the legislators that represent the member towns? Are they involved in any of the meetings?
They have not been because there hasn't been really a plan that was agreed to by the member towns to present to them. It's premature at this point because all I wanted to do was make sure that everybody understood. You can't just simply do it by a vote of this board.
It's going to require an amendment to our charter.
Right.
And we do plan to bring that report back to.
Yeah, right. We haven't seen what the response is. It may or it may not, but Bart's saying if we're going to make that change, the probability is that there's going to be a charter change. We'll make that determination when we see what the final product is.
Okay, thanks. And then on a different note, in regard to the municipal unions and the getting everyone to agree or not, can I get a copy of what is being provided to the employees? Because I know we want to be explicit that this is a choice on their part and not just you need to sign here.
Sure. Bob, can you do that?
You want the wording, you want the specific wording.
What the
and
specific sign-off is that you're getting?
From the union staff. Give a copy of the document that we've provided.
Assuming it's consistent with the constitutional.
I'm just curious.
We'll
I'd
get
like
that to you
like to
tomorrow.
see it. And also I'd like to see the copies of the S&P and Moody's reports on the ratings, if that's possible.
John, I guess John's,
Yeah, we can get that.
Okay,
we'll get that to you.
thank you.
Okay, any further questions on this? I'm sorry, Commissioner.
Is Hartford and other town, whichever it is, representing in the discussion, and have they gone back to their leadership?
Hartford was here. I don't believe East Hartford was, were they?
No, East
Well, East Hartford was here,
Hartford
yeah.
Yeah, it was Weathers.
Was Weathersfield? I thought Weathersfield. Who was here from Weathers?
Yeah, Weathersfield.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, the new town manager
So,
was there.
from the initial numbers that were given to us, the areas that would have a negative impact were number one, Hartford, it would have a major change to, and East Hartford. Everybody else would have gradations of positive impact.
Further questions? Can we proceed with the agenda? Item number, I'm sorry, Rich, go ahead.
I thought Bart was going to handle 10 and 12.
10 and 12 was included in his report.
The settlement.
10B,
Oh, no, we haven't gotten to the settlement.
We haven't got to it
We
yet.
haven't done Eversource.
No,
John, do you want to do that now? Why don't we do that right now? You don't need an executive for that, that's.
Staff looking for a request to settle a lawsuit for the amount of $48,500. It's a negligence action.
The claim damages, you should know, are 100,000.
105,000.
And we had, this was a broken bolt that damaged Eversource equipment. We examined very carefully whether we could make a claim against the bolt manufacturer, but that proved fruitless. Am I correct, John? So essentially, we believe it's in MDC's best interest to resolve this lawsuit for half of the actual damages that they sustained.
Bolt to what?
Yeah, what are we using bolts for?
It's a cap. The water main was capped, and a bolt was put in place to keep the cap in place.
like in the
like a
street.
9-inch iron bolt.
It's like in the street. Yeah, that worked out.
So no one was injured, it was a piece of equipment that was
Yes.
damaged.
Correct.
Who's gonna,
Their trucks,
Bart.
obviously.
It was an underwater, an underground vault.
who's gonna chair the meeting? Vice chairman's not here. You wanna take over?
Yeah, I'll take over.
I'm going to abstain on this issue. I represent Northeast Utility Eversource, so I don't want to.
In this particular matter, I will take over as chairman for a brief moment since the vice chairman is not here. Are there any further questions on this?
What was the physical damage to?
To Eversource's electrical equipment.
Yeah.
On a certain line?
Yeah. And it's been very carefully examined, those damages at this point by council. And we're satisfied that that is, in fact, what they have lost.
Have we ever had an issue like this where it's been equipment damaged and we paid a?
Yeah, I think we did with Hartford Hospital, didn't we?
It happens with other utilities as well.
Okay.
Any further questions?
Wouldn't insurance handle this?
We have a deductible. So,
We're self-insured.
We're self-insured.
Oh.
No deductibles.
so that's that. Okay,
Any
any,
motion?
yeah, we have a motion. Approved. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any further comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Chairman?
Okay, what are we on? Item
10A, I think.
Item 9. Board of Finance consideration of and potential action regarding approval of capital improvements projects, business transformation project management, and data cleansing. Recommended action, receive the report and adopt the resolution. Is there a motion?
I'm out.
Moved and seconded. Who's? Buddy?
Passed the Board of Finance unanimous with one abstention.
Discussion?
This is the SAP, Mr. Chairman? Okay. Well, I guess I have a couple of questions. I guess one of the things I would be concerned about here is to what extent we're going to deal with training with regard to SAP in terms of having on staff people who have a sufficient knowledge of the various modules so that we don't get caught short. Because these modules are being rolled out just about changes every year, and this is a never-ending story. So I would be very much concerned about the depth of our
Some alternative to.
paying attention to training and getting people on our staff who are up to snuff on this.
The only thing I would mention, Commissioner Taylor, is that this project is separate from the HCL System Integrator project, and that training and all of that support of that is already under contract with HCL, and we will make sure that we have adequate training as part of our implementation, our re-implementation of the project. This is for support, program management support, and also data cleansing of our data prior to going live in the new system.
And how much is the ACL contract?
The HCL total value of that contract has not changed. We're still
Can
in
you
the
tell me
process.
the amount?
Oh, it was $13.6 million.
So, and we paid what, approximately 6 million of that already?
5.
5? Okay, so we're still owe the 8 and now 7.5.
The 8
So
and
this is a $20 million plus fix, the SAP, this time around.
Correct.
So we've probably spent 30, 35 million. I just hope we're doing the right thing. Because in the last 10 years, we've spent a lot of money, and now it's another $20 million here you're voting on. So,
It's not-
If I could just add to the commissioner's concerns, as we presented to audit, and those concerns were well registered. And the reason why part of the 7.5 million, 1.8 or approximately $2 million is for a contract directly with SAP to be our project manager to make sure that HCL, which is our contracted firm that implements the software, to be successful. We have actually written in milestones for the project manager, which is SAP, to make sure that this project is successful and SAP has their fingerprints and responsibility to deliver a completed project. We're following the same model that others in the industry that have had this very same problem with their implementation. And the remaining portion of that, as we mentioned at finance, approximately 2 million of the 7.5 is for the data cleansing, which is a specialty in itself. Our staff does not have the time or capable of doing that data cleansing. And then there is approximately a $3.5 million in a guesstimate because we're early on in this stage. What I did offer at the Board of Finance was it is roughly August of 2018, and we could amend this resolution to request the $1.8 million for SAP contract, approximately $1 million to get us from now until into early 2019 to start the process of developing data cleansing with the support of SAP, and then come back to the board requesting an actual amount that we know and we'd have more information. We wanted this board, the audit committee, the full board, the Board of Finance, to understand the magnitude of what we believe is, to your point, Commissioner, it's approximately $7.5 million more to finish this project correctly. We have been very clear to SAP, if this project fails with SAP at the helm as our project manager, this board is not going to recommend to utilize SAP any longer. So we've been very clear to SAP on that.
will we, after, say, a year, whatever this fix is, how many months?
We're hoping for a 10-month
Okay,
implementation.
so over the next year. So to Al's point, as far as education, in 219, do we have the staff right now that will be able to put in all the new updates each year and then educate our employees on how the changes are and how to,
So Kelly mentioned that as part of the project.
Or are we gonna need a consultant to come in each year and put these, or SAP, whoever, to come in and put these updates?
So as part of the project, Commissioner, we are going to, this is approximately a 10-month exercise. We've obviously been working on this for a year and a half, as you're aware. The exercise in itself is training for staff, but as part of the contract with HCL, they're responsible, and in combination with SAP as the project manager, those two contracts are responsible to help train our staff. And then we will, after the project is complete, there's what they call a maintenance contract, which we will have to bring in someone, and it might be SAP, it could be someone like HCL, but someone has to maintain the system on an annual basis, and that's a separate contract that we will bring to the board once we RFP that and make a selection. The staff itself will, obviously the software is good for a certain period of time, and let's assume that it's good for what is the date on the?
But I wanna make sure we
Yes,
do that
we do.
each year, we get a consultant, whoever, to come
Absolutely.
in and work with our staff to
Yes.
make sure the updates are done correctly and that our staff is taught, like Al said, in how to, maintain it.
Just as a point, I hope, and again, that this issue is that we are now dealing with SAP, so when we change, our system doesn't have to be changed to meet SAP's change, but the SAP changes follow the SAP system.
Right.
That's what got us into trouble last time. We tried to reconstruct our system and put it in place here instead of running on the SAP system. So every time it was updated, we had to update our system to update to their system. Was that not the issue that we found? That we're eliminating, so that those constant upgrades, and the upgrades now are coming less than every year. There's some of them are coming every 8 months. So that's why it's so significant that we're not moving, we don't have to reinvent the world here to be able to meet that licensing change. Go ahead, George.
So we're bonding $7.5 million additional dollars. How long is the bond for something like this? Are we going to be paying back this over 30 years? Or would this be something we negotiate for
20 years?
For
20 years.
3, 4, 5 years? Because as we know with SAP, and even your desktop computer at home or your app on your phone, everything goes obsolete. So are we spending money on something that will be obsolete before the bond is paid off? It's not like a pipe.
Yes, that's a good point. We bond, capitalize over a 20-year period. And so there is constant, and I've mentioned this before, in our IT hardware, we are responsible and should be responsible to spend approximately 5% per year of our operational budget of upgrading our hardware. And the MDC, up until when Bob Schwarm came on board, we were spending about less than 1%. So we do need to spend monies on a 5-year basis, let's say, to upgrade hardware. That, unfortunately, is bonded over a 20-year period.
Why do they go to a 5-year bond?
Well, I guess the challenge we have is the challenge that we have is if we pay as you go. We just talked about what the cost of a $2.8 million expense would be for not receiving revenue from DEEP. It's about 5% increase in the Avalon budget. So as you shrink those durations, you're going to increase the debt service payment to the towns. So we can look at those options, but there is an expense to the towns.
Right, because in Weathersfield, we just went through a high school renovation, and part of it was technology, all right? And the last thing we want to do was, on throwaway laptops, is pay for those for 30 years, okay? Or the software that goes with them. And I know at the big giant corporation I work at, with regard to technology, as I have a laptop, when the warranty is up, okay, I get a new laptop, even if I don't need it, okay? So that's your 5% that you're talking about, which is separate than buying software services here. We had meetings about SAP in the last couple months.
Yep.
It's not that this has to be done. I'm just concerned about how we're going to pay for it and paying for something that will be obsolete in a certain amount of time.
We do pay for a lot of those smaller products through the operational expense.
That's
through the budget.
just a capital, our capital budget.
Operational expense.
This is our operating system, not hardware, so to
Right.
speak. So it's a little,
Software.
yeah.
Yeah, understood, but software does go
Oh, of course.
obsolete.
We do know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, every year.
Yeah, and it's a maintenance, so it's a, you're buying the software up front for, quote, $20 million, and then you're maintaining it through an operational expense to keep it current.
But part of this issue that you're having here is because we're stuck in 2003 or whatever the date was, the last time that SAP was updated. Is that true?
99.
That was 20 years ago.
It was updated in 2004.
2004.
99 was the original
Okay.
implementation.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah, sort of, yeah.
I'm not sure what update
Sort
in 2004.
But part of this, from what I'm hearing, is that there will be capital money or operating money spent, the 5% or whatever the heck number you're talking about. So hopefully this doesn't happen again. In regard to,
Well,
Wait-
our
waiting
goal is
15
to not
years.
have this happen again. That's why we're going through this exercise and making sure it's done correctly this time with SAP at the helm and putting responsibility with them contractually for the success of the project.
so when you go out for bonds for this, will it be 20 years or would you try?
I think we got to review that with
We
the
can,
bond
we can
council.
review that and bring that back to the board in terms of what that
I
means to
just
the
get-
alarm. Right.
Whether it's a short-term 5-year,
Yep.
not a bond, it could be a loan or a bond,
Sure.
but you're better off in the bond market.
You're better off going the 20 years.
Yeah, but, you know, if it's a $5 million bond, and you're gonna pay it back in 5 years, you're gonna pay $1 million a year plus the interest. So that $1 million
Time won't impact.
spread out over 8 towns is,
But then it's obsolete. It's like,
I-
getting a car loan for, 80 months.
Yeah, but the overall mainframe and the,
right.
that stuff should last you 20 years. It's what you build onto it that you pay for on a shorter-term basis. Now, but you're right. Data centers in general are recorded every 3.5 years. So, it's digging out of a hole. Questions? Someone here? Rich?
Yeah, Scott, you had mentioned
I'm
there's
sorry,
going to be
Jen.
some milestones required here for SAP to hit. Is that part of their contractual arrangement?
Yes, it is.
That's a good thing.
Deliverables, yes,
Deliverables, that's a
deliverables with a holdback.
4 specific milestones.
John?
That was the question, because it
Okay.
just, the company I was with put SAP in, and when it came to the training of people, they were supposed to bring in their A crew, they brought in their C crew, and they couldn't even answer very simple questions. So I'm assuming that's the question, is there any
And they're
financial
done that.
milestones that they get hurt if they don't do it? Okay, thank you.
Further discussion? If not, are you ready for the question? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we did 10A, I'm sorry, we did 10B. 10A, Bureau of Public Works, consideration and potential action regarding release of sewer right-of-way 100 Helmsford Way, Windsor. So the recommendation, receive the report and adopt the resolution. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Been moved and seconded. Discussion. Who's, Rich?
This came before Bureau of Public Works, and it was passed unanimously.
Okay. Discussion? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item 11, consideration and potential action regarding authorization for sale of vehicles. Recommended action, receive the report and adopt the resolution. Is there a motion?
So moved.
So moved and seconded. Who's this, finance or who's the sale?
Is this Scott's truck?
We don't usually.
No.
I mean, you don't bring vehicles to us, so why this time do you bring this vehicle?
And this is less than.
We dispose of a lot of vehicles.
Well, it's for sale of vehicles. Are we selling vehicles?
Mr. Chairman, it's $20,000. This has got to come before to sell a vehicle, a used, and this is like not just used, it's just done, it's getting sold for scrap. Is that what I understand?
Well, we got a procedure. If it's sold to somebody, we have a procedure to do that.
It's got to come before the district board for $20,000 sale. I mean, it could have gone to Board of Finance. We could have done it, but I don't know why it has to come in front of the district board
I
for
would-
such a small amount. I
Yeah,
mean,
I would, this is a piece of equipment that's extremely unique. In
That
terms
truck,
of,
right?
it's not a pickup truck. It's not something that, most of our vehicles go to auction.
Right.
And we use it at the auction. This is not a vehicle that is typically, it's going to be bought at an auction. So I believe the concept was, because it's a unique vehicle and we're selling it specifically to a company,
Specific party.
we wanted the board to agree that we could sell it to this company for $20,000.
Selling it to.
Just one of the
I
vac
just-
trucks. or
Yeah, it's one of the older vac trucks.
I just have a question, though. If it's to a specific company, it may be somebody that sits on this commission that has a relationship with that company. Shouldn't we know? Does it say the company?
I'm asking, who is the company?
Standard Equipment Company.
Oh, it is standard?
Standard.
Standard Equipment Company.
Okay.
Are there any relationships? I mean, it's a far, yeah.
There are, just abstain from it.
Yeah.
I don't know if.
It's a scrap company, I assume.
Typically, the vehicles are sold through auction. This one is being sold as scrap to a specific company. And the charter reference 2-12 says district board has control over sales of real and personal property. So that's the reason it's before the board.
Got it. I got it, just, you know, I mean, what is it now, $170 million budget? I mean, well, we're gonna bring every $20,000 item here, that's a, so
I see a picture of the truck. So moved. We have a
Okay,
motion.
is there further discussion? Are you clear what we're doing here, or why we're doing it?
Laugh happy at 8 o'clock.
Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Item number 12, consideration and potential action regarding, oh, we just did that, okay. Taking care of that. 13, opportunity for general public comments.
We outlasted Judy.
Commissioners, questions and comments?
Can we at a future date entertain amendment to our procedures here regarding an amount for situations like this on property? You know, I mean, $20,000.
Can we refer that to the audit committee to make a recommendation?
It's in the charter.
But this is relative to the charter, we can't change that.
I understand.
They could issue authorization up to a certain amount. Yeah.
Can we refer that to the audit committee? Further comments from commissioners?
I have a question, Bill.
Rich.
The next board meeting in August, is the date still the first Monday?
It's scheduled for Monday, August 6th.
But we'll need a special meeting before September 1.
There's a meeting September 5th. My understanding is we gave them up until the date of September 1st. So if they don't meet that date,
We can always have a special meeting on that. Okay, further, without any further comments, I'm sorry, Alan?
Yeah, so Commissioner Clay didn't show up as we requested. So will we issue the second invitation prior to September 5th?
I think that I would recommend that we try to meet in a meaningful negotiation and try to accomplish something rather than bring the commissioner back before the board. He wrote a letter, explained that he's in Washington. Obviously, he's got a concern here. He was concerned on the Friday conversation. I think that we've just got to be able to understand that we've got to move forward in some kind of a meaningful negotiation here. And let's see how that goes down. I don't think it's productive to invite him to the September meeting when we're trying to negotiate something with him. I think he was sincere in his feeling that he wants to do something and resolve this. So let's see what we can do. Any further questions? If not, the proper motion to adjourn is in. Without objection, we stand adjourned.